Imagine two neighboring cities built on the same coastline, both famous for their skylines, both packed with legends, both constantly rebuilding after earthquakes of audience expectation. One city is Marvel, the other is DC, and the question, which universe is actually better, only sounds simple until you decide what better means. Bigger, smarter, braver, more consistent, more emotionally honest, more iconic, more rewatchable, more artistically varied, more culturally influential, or just more fun. If you judge by the clearest measurable scoreboard, global theatrical money, Marvel's connected film machine has been the most dominant franchise model ever assembled, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe ranked as the top grossing film franchise at about $32,487 billion worldwide across 37 films, a lead so large it almost feels like a different sport, and that gap matters because in modern Hollywood box office isn't just bragging rights, it's oxygen that buys you sequels, spin-offs, experiments, and the ability to survive a stumble without collapsing. And yes, Marvel has stumbled, openly acknowledging that a flood of content after Avengers Endgame contributed to underperformance, and that it began reducing output in 2024 while also cutting film budgets. For 2024-2025 compared with 2022-2023, DC's main recent shared universe run, the DC Extended Universe, still looks huge in ordinary terms, over $7 billion globally, but the Wikipedia summary is blunt about volatility. 15 theatrical films, 8 of them not breaking even theatrically, and even though Aquaman crossed $1.15 billion worldwide, the overall pattern is a roller coaster rather than a steady climb. So if better means more consistently engineered to win worldwide theatrical attention, Marvel has the stronger claim, but a universe isn't only a balance sheet, it's a storytelling philosophy, and Marvel's philosophy is fundamentally infrastructural. It treats characters like neighborhoods, movies like roads, and crossovers like bridges, and its greatest superpower has been patience, building a baseline of understandable heroes and simple emotional arcs, then paying it off in giant communal events where the audience feels rewarded for paying attention over time. At its best, this approach creates something audiences rarely get anywhere else: long-form character attachment inside a blockbuster pipeline, where an in-joke can still land because it's built on years of shared memory, and where a team-up isn't a random marketing stunt, but the climax of a carefully staged cultural ritual. But Marvel's strength is also its risk, because the bigger the city grows, the more it needs traffic control, and the more every new project can start to feel like homework if viewers suspect they must keep up with everything to enjoy anything. This is the downside that Marvel itself has effectively conceded by pulling back output and budgets, which is not a moral failure but a reality check that even the most successful universe can create audience fatigue if expansion outpaces meaning. DC, on the other hand, has often behaved less like an infrastructure-first city and more like a territory of strong, sometimes competing kingdoms, where the mythic idea of heroes is the starting point, gods among mortals, symbols before psychology, and that can produce extremes. When DC clicks, it can feel grander, stranger, and more archetypal than Marvel, because Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman aren't just characters, they're cultural shorthand. And that mythic weight can deliver a kind of operatic intensity Marvel rarely chases. The problem is that in a cinematic universe format, myth without stable planning can turn into whiplash, and the DCEU became infamous, not because it lacked iconic raw material, but because it struggled to maintain a consistent creative compass across films, tones, and leadership decisions, resulting in a franchise that could produce a billion-dollar wave and then crash into a run of films that audiences treated as optional. Yet here is where the which is better argument becomes genuinely interesting, because DC's turbulence has also created a unique advantage: the freedom to reinvent without breaking the audience's trust in a single continuous timeline, and the current strategy shift, moving into the new DC Universe, DCU, created by James Gunn and Peter Safran as a soft reboot, formalizes that advantage by promising a united continuity across live-action film and TV, animation, and video games, while isolating out-of-continuity projects under the DC Elseworlds label. This is a direct answer to Marvel's biggest modern challenge, continuity overload, because it gives DC a clean mainline for shared story clarity while still letting it keep the artistic escape hatch of standalone visions. And if that works, DC could become the rare franchise that gets both structure and spontaneity, one trunk, many branches, and clear labeling so audiences don't feel tricked. Now, beyond money and continuity, better can mean better at creating attachment. And Marvel's most consistent advantage is relatability. not because its heroes are weaker, but because the brand identity has long leaned into the human scale. Jokes, flaws, everyday awkwardness, friendships, found families. So even cosmic stories are told with the emotional language of people figuring themselves out, and that relatability becomes a kind of mass appeal engine. It sells tickets to people who don't read comics, who can still follow the heart of a character even if they don't know the lore. DC's icons can also be deeply human, but the brand's public perception often frames them as heavier and more symbolic, and that can be both a magnet and a barrier. For some viewers, DC's best stories feel more meaningful because they aim for mythic seriousness, moral dilemmas, and the burden of power, while for others, the same seriousness reads as self-importance if it isn't balanced with warmth and humor. And then there's the question of variety, where it's easy to assume Marvel wins because it has so many films, but quantity isn't variety by itself. Variety means genuine tonal range, creative risk, and the ability to let different storytellers build different kinds of worlds without forcing them into identical shapes. Marvel's shared style has often been a feature, cohesion, and sometimes a complaint, sameness, while DC's unevenness has sometimes been a flaw, inconsistency, and sometimes an accidental feature, distinct identities. Put differently, Marvel has historically optimized for reliable satisfaction, while DC has often swung for high highs, and your personal definition of better depends on which you value. Do you want a universe that almost always gives you something enjoyable and coherent, or do you want one that occasionally gives you something that feels singular, even if it means you'll also get more misses? And because the title says actually better, we have to admit one more uncomfortable truth. The word better is often a disguise for better for me, because people don't only choose universes like consumers, they choose them like identities, preferring the vibe that matches their own inner weather. Marvel as the bustling city of interconnected lives, DC as the cathedral of modern myth. So here's a more honest way to answer the question that respects both the facts and the feelings. Marvel is better if your primary criteria are proven franchise-scale success, consistency of a connected narrative approach, and the ability to turn long-term continuity into event cinema on an industry-leading level. DC is better if your primary criteria are mythic iconography, the potential for standalone, auteur-driven reinvention, and the sense that superheroes can operate as timeless symbols rather than just serialized characters. And in 2026, the truly ultimate comparison may be less about crowning a permanent winner and more about recognizing that they are evolving in opposite directions at exactly the moment audiences demand change. Marvel, the champion, is tightening focus and reducing output to restore quality control and event status, while DC, the challenger, is rebuilding its core continuity with a clear leadership plan and an explicit system, mainline DCU versus Elseworlds, designed to prevent confusion. If both succeed, the best-case future is not Marvel beating DC or DC beating Marvel, but each becoming more like the best version of itself. Marvel rediscovering scarcity, sharpness, and must-see clarity, DC converting its legendary icons and creative boldness into a stable shared universe rhythm without flattening what makes it distinct. So which universe is actually better? If you mean which one has objectively proven dominance as a single connected film franchise, Marvel is the stronger factual answer. If you mean which one has the most iconic superhero mythology and the most room to reinvent without continuity handcuffs, DC has the stronger philosophical argument. And if you mean what should I watch or read right now, the best answer is the one that doesn't force you to choose a flag at all. Pick Marvel when you want a long, coherent ride with cumulative payoffs. Pick DC when you want myth, mood, and the thrill that a bold reinvention might either soar or crash, because the rivalry isn't only a war, it's a kind of creative gravity that keeps both universes from going lazy for too long.